You know, when you've been working on your project for a couple weeks, you think it's going pretty well, then suddenly you accidentally hit delete and it's all gone? Yeah, that sucks a lot. But it's a preventable situation. We're going to talk about that today. We are going over source control. And this is something that I said I wouldn't do when I first started doing YouTube videos. I'm actually going to do a tutorial about how to set up source control for your projects. If you're not using source control, you definitely should be. It will save your ass more times than you can count, and it also can help you work a lot faster. We're not going to talk about workflow with source control today. I'm just going to get you all set up with the source control methods that I use. That's git-lfs, and we're going to use GitHub because that's a pretty common option for people to look at. You could do this with any other Git hosting provider like Azure DevOps, which is what I use. You could use GitLab. You could do your own if you really wanted to. We're going to look at GitHub. It's an easy option for most people. It's probably the friendliest of all of the options that I mentioned. If you're new here, well, I don't normally do videos like this, so we'll see how it goes. It's a first time for me too. My name's Kyle. I do videos not like this one 2 times per week. So give me a subscribe right down there if you want to get more of this kind of stuff. Before we get started though, I'm going to go over the 3 tools that we're going to use to implement all of this, and that is Git, git-lfs, and GitHub. Git is a tool that keeps track of changes in files. At the end of the day, that's all it does. Now, how it does that is associating what's called a commit with another commit prior in history. And so when you have a commit in Git, it's just going to point to the next commit, and that's all it is. You don't have to worry about it being ultra complex. You just have to think about it as each of these funny looking numbers I get, it just represents one set of changes or one commit. And they may have a pointer to another set of changes. But Git is not very good for storing binary data, like big files, like 3D models or pictures or anything like that. And that's where git-lfs comes in. Git-lfs is a plugin that goes on top of Git that lets Git associate a pointer to a file somewhere else in its history. So all it does locally in Git is say, hey, here's this pointer to a file. It kind of tells me where I've stored it and where to go retrieve it when you need to. Git-lfs will store that file in a different place. And so that's how it keeps track of the history as it's going through. I'm not going to go into a deep dive of how these things work, but that should be high level, good enough for understanding roughly how your changes are going to be tracked in the source control tools. The last one on that list, GitHub. So a lot of people confuse GitHub with Git, and they are not the same thing. Git is a separate tool than GitHub. GitHub is just a way to host a Git repository. What is a repository? A repository is the thing that all of those commits I talked about are associated with. And so GitHub just hosts that in a remote place that's secure and widely available for you. You also have a copy of that repository on your local machine, and so does every other person that's pulled your repository from its remote, in this case GitHub, onto their local machine. And that's one of the core principles of Git as a source control method. It's decentralized, so it doesn't have a central authority. Any of those computers that have pulled the repository could act as what's called the remote for another repository. Enough about all the boring theory though, let's get in and get to work and set up a repo. Before we get started, let's go over our plan for what we're going to do today. We're going to download Git and git-lfs, create that empty GitHub repo, create a new local game project, or if you already have one, you can skip this. We're going to add the gitignore and gitattributes files, which just ignores stuff you don't want Git to track and tells git-lfs what it should upload. We're then going to make that first commit locally. Usually you call this initial commit or something like that. There's a practice that people seem to do. And one best practice I want to mention here that's really important is to make sure to keep your main branch always working. There are other strategies for doing this, but I prefer keeping main as an always working branch so it always builds in this case, and it is always a game that you can play. We're going to set up the remote, so that's setting the remote using the command line to push to our GitHub repo that we created. We're going to push that to the GitHub repo, and then we are going to party because you just set up your Git repo. So like I said here, we're going to download Git and git-lfs. I've already done this, so I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to show you the sites here. I'll keep these links down in the video too so you can find them. But just download the one that's appropriate for your operating system. Similar with git-lfs, download the extension and install it after you've installed Git. And that is when we can go and create our new repository. Now, I'm over here on GitHub. I've already got the page up. To get here, all you have to do when you've logged into GitHub, you'll see at the bar at the top here, there's create new, you hit new repository. And that brings up exactly the screen that you're looking at. You can choose an owner. In this case, I'm going to put it in the studio GitHub instead of my personal one. We'll give it a name. GitHub always has these nice, funny name. So I actually like that one. I'm going to use it. So we're going to call it Super Guacamole. And that is all we need to do here. We don't necessarily need to give it a description. You can if you like. I'm going to keep this as private for now. And this one's important. Don't add a README file or a gitignore template or a license at this point in time. A license you do need if you're public. If it's a private repo, it really doesn't matter. So go ahead and click that Create Repository button. And then we're set. We're not going to come back into the browser until we're ready to push our code. GitHub does have some handy things down here that we're going to borrow from to help us, but we'll do that a bit later. Okay, so next up, we have to get that local game project. This depends on the engine you're using. I've got Unreal Project Browser up here because I use Unreal. If you use Unity, you would create a Unity project just as you know how. I have this in here just to show the step and like when I think is the best time to do it. I've already created the project, so we're going to hop into that one and edit the next one, but you would just hit that create button. Okay, here we go. This is the new project that Unreal created. I've got a couple things in here. It's just the standard setup. We're not going to even open this project. It's not important right now. What we are going to do though is go ahead and head into that project, my test project, and we're going to open up our editor. In this case, I'm just opening VS Code. Yes, I trust myself. And we're going to make two new files in here. I'm actually going to copy these from my GitHub, because that's where I keep them. So we'll head on over there. I'll make these publicly available as well. I just haven't done it right now. These are gists. So this is my gitignore file. You can see there. Paste it, give it a save, and call it .gitignore. The dot is a historical thing. It means a hidden file or a file that's not part of the project. That's not really important for right now either. That's, if you're wondering why the dot's there, that's why it's there. So we've added this file. Let's take a quick look at it. I got this from someone else on GitHub and then I edited it, so I can't remember where I got it because I've had it for so long. You can see a bunch of different things in here that are like start.exe. That's telling Git to ignore executables or to ignore these file types. You'll notice some other things here. I have ignored some Affinity Photo files. I use Affinity Photo. You would put something like Photoshop's block file in here if it had those. I also ignore parts of the Steam SDK. You may need to edit this depending on what version of the Steam SDK you have. I should probably change it to be a wildcard. Maybe I'll do that by the time the video uploads. I keep some other folders as well. I have a build folder, and that's where I put the build artifacts. I just outright ignore that. And other than that, anything else in here is just things that you really don't want to include in source control. They're just not important for source control, and many of them are just generated locally. So let's go to our next file. And this is our gitiattributes file. Again, this one is for Unreal Engine. If you use a different engine, maybe use Unity or Godot, yours are going to be slightly different as well. You'll have some common things too though, because a lot of content types, I tell git-lfs to include if I'm including those. All this file is doing is saying, hey, go in there and anytime you see these kind of files, these are binary files, send that to git-lfs instead of to git. And so git's going to create, once again, that little pointer as its commit, and it's going to point to the place that this binary file lives. So if you are using this and you're doing in Unity, for example, just change this section right here to the Unity assets that you want to ignore. So we've got that there. We're good to go. Now, I use the command line to do this kind of stuff. You can also use a GUI. Like VS Code has its little source code thing in here. It doesn't know it's a Git repo yet though. So what we have to do, you see if I were to say git status, that's how you check if something exists on the command line. It doesn't exist. So we have to say git init. Cool. And just to make our branches line up, we're going to check out main. We are going to delete the one it called master. Oops, kind of helps if you type it correctly. Get branch-d, that just tells it to hard delete, and it looks like it already did. If I do a get status, you can see that's all the stuff I have in here. If you do get branch, there are no other branches besides main right now.
And that's what we've got. So we are going to do our first commit in here. And that one is really easy. You can just do git add dash dash all. That's going to say, so because you have these gitignore and gitattributes files, it's going to ignore some stuff. If you had done this before you added these, it would have added every single file in here, and it would be kind of a headache to undo that. So don't do that. Make sure you get those ignore files in first. So it has now done that. It gave me a little warning because I'm in Windows. So if we do another git status, you can look through here and see, hey, these are all the things that it added. And you'll note it did add uasset. That's the binary I talked about. It'll add other binaries too, but these are just pointers to where those files are going to live. So what we can do now, back to our plan, initial commit. I've typed it so many times, my terminal remembers. Git commit -m. The -m flag is the message, so you always have to say that if you're using terminal. Git commit -m, my message, the commit message. If you did want to commit all of the things that were outstanding, you could do a little shortcut like this and say git commit -a for all -m, and that would just commit everything that is currently state in red in my case. Cool. So that's what we have to do here. Now let's go and point this local repo to the remote repo. That we get right over here. So I mentioned earlier those handy things. I'm going to use HTTPS. You can use either one. It does depend on what your Git hosting provider supports. So if we go down, see right here, this is the one we want. Push from an existing repository using the command line. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I like to copy these line by line. I don't like executing them all in a block. Also, I want to talk about them when I'm doing them. You can do all of them at the same time. So we're going to git remote add origin, this URL. What that did is git remote is the first command. It's how you manage all of the remotes. In this case, any other computer that is not your local one. Adds a remote. Origin is the name that you're giving it. Origin is the standard name for the central repository that you're considering your source of truth. Like I said, Git is decentralized, so there's no central repository, but origin is the one that you typically use for your main. Cool. We already have main set up. We actually don't need to do that because I already did it. And now git push -u origin. So what this is going to do is push all of my stuff from my local to the main branch on the remote. -u is a flag that says set the upstream. And here, this is where you would have to sign in, you'd have to do something. So it's asking me to sign in, since I haven't done that. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Okay, there we go. We have finished uploading everything to GitHub. You probably would have seen a bunch of output through here that tells you all the files it's churning through. You can change the amount of output you get from Git on this too, so that's something you can tweak. I'm not gonna go over it here though, because it's kind of an advanced thing. This is good enough. If everything worked correctly, we should be able to go back to our repo and refresh the page, and look at that. That's all of our new stuff with mostly everything that we had in the repo, except for all that stuff we ignored, and the files are uploaded to git-lfs instead of to Git. So now is time for us to do the most important part of this, and that is party.
All right, there you go. You've got your repo set up. Even though I used Unreal Engine to set this project up, you could do this with Unity, you could do this with Godot, you could do this with any other game engine. The difference is going to be in what you set in your gitignore file and what you set in that gitattributes file that tracks all the binary data. Other than that, it's the same process, but I do have a sample gitattributes and gitignore file for Unreal projects that I use that's hosted publicly for you all to go download. I'll include links to those down in the description. I hope you like this video. It's a new thing for me. I don't normally do tutorial content. If you liked it, let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.